Hello, hello! Welcome to Sun Powered Tarot. My name is Kaden. Thanks for stopping by. Today, I figured we'd talk a little bit about tarot symbolism because that's what's been on my mind recently. I've been thinking about how, one card in tarot can mean a lot of different things, right? Like, you'll get a guidebook and go through it and see different keywords or different meanings. You'll see different meanings across different guidebooks from different decks and different authors. And sometimes it can get kind of overwhelming. You pull a card and you go, okay, I know this can mean these 20 different things, but what does it mean right here and right now? Um, some of that is down to context, right? So a spread position or asking a specific question can kind of help go over what something means. But sometimes too, when I've been doing readings recently, I've been thinking about what the deck brings to that aspect of the card, because we have a lot of broad themes and archetypes in tarot, and sometimes it's nice to just see how different decks do it differently. So today, what I wanted to do is kind of explore how art adds to the experience of reading tarot. So between different decks, what different layers does the art add? How does a deck flavor a reading, basically? Um, and so today I've grabbed the RWS and the Spacious Tarot, and I picked out a couple of cards to kind of look at and chat about, um, and just kind of see how I read them differently, because that's something that I've noticed I do, but I thought it would be good to just kind of sit down and think about it. So here we go. The Spacious Tarot has no human figures, while the RWS is almost entirely human figures, so there's definitely some differences. I think it'll be interesting to see what they are. So, yeah, let's get started. All right. So, the first card that I grabbed to look at is the Hierophant, which immediately very different between these two decks. The Spacious Tarot is RWS based in the sense that it kind of follows their same general meanings, but like I mentioned earlier, there's basically no human figures in here. It's all kind of nature based and, well, spacious, versus, the RWS, which was designed to be a very specific interpretation of the ideal tarot. And has a lot of esoteric imagery and references, and I'm not going to pretend that I get all of those, even though there are some that I can point out. But okay, immediately going through the Hierophant, I picked these two out because they are so different. When I read the Hierophant, I usually think of hierarchy, order, structured groups, thinking at things at the level of a society. And with the RWS, we have this very kind of old style, important religious figure. There's clear hierarchy here, there's structure and order in a society. And I think the Spacious Tarot interpretation of that one is really interesting because we get these big stones, we have a sunrise coming up, there's a moon in the sky, which gives us some of that intuition, mysterious, unknown kind of symbolism that we see a lot in the tarot. There's an aspect of the Hierophant that is kind of this ancient knowledge. In the RWS, I kind of get the sense that there's traditions that are passed down from generation to generation and things are done a certain way. In the Hierophant, in the Spacious Tarot, there's still that sense of tradition and perhaps traditional knowledge that gets passed down, but this is a more mysterious sense in that kind of thinking Stonehenge, right? Do we really know what they were there for? There's a bit of mystery to it. And it's less of a... I read this card less as hierarchy, and the Hierophant and the RWS is a little bit more structured, ordered, that kind of thing. So that's an interesting difference there. Let's look at the next one that I picked out is the Wheel of Fortune. And really, the main reason I grabbed this one was because the RWS Wheel of Fortune, again, has a lot of this esoteric symbolism, that means very specific things and was put there very intentionally. I don't understand a lot of it, quite frankly. There's a lot going on in that card. I would like to learn eventually. I think it would be kind of neat to put together a video on, like, okay, I did some research, here's a lot of the RWS symbolism that I missed, because I think that could be kind of fun. But in the Spacious Tarot, the Wheel of Fortune, again, there's a little bit less going on here. We have a spiral in the middle, and we have, like, the circle of branches, and we have basically the different seasons represented. I like the Spacious Tarot Wheel of Fortune because it's more of a passing of time kind of card. I get more of the sense of cycles and things happening perhaps slowly, even if unpredictably, while in the RWS, again, there's a lot going on here. It feels more like fate, and things can just change and happen to you, rather than, the seasons are going, time is passing, but even though things aren't completely in your control, you do have a little bit of agency. And of course, you can read either of these kind of either way, right? The meanings of tarot are so broad, and we all bring our own different perspectives to it, and kind of read things in a way that makes sense to us. But kind of going off of these, like, very different images, different things come to mind. So, perhaps, like, the core meaning of the Wheel of Fortune is the same across all decks, or at least decks in the Rider-Waite-Smith tradition. But just sitting down and looking at the art, I kind of go different ways to the interpretation. Again, that can change based on, like, the spread position, what question I'm asking, if there's any other context that I have about the situation that I'm reading for, things like that. So I think it's fun to just kind of see, like, what flavor a deck brings a reading, And we see all these decks and stuff on TarotTube, and it's really cool. And I wish we'd sometimes get a little bit more in depth into, like, how does a deck read, what makes it different, what makes it cool, that kind of stuff. But yeah, that's the Wheel of Fortune. The next card that I grabbed to look at was the Hanged Man, because again, this is one where the Spacious Tarot takes a very striking kind of different space in the imagery. It works very well for the deck in the sense that, like, this is a very spacious card. And when I first saw this card, it was very much like, whoa. Yeah. So the Hanged Man, when I read, is usually a release, a letting go. Martyrdom is another keyword that kind of floats around that I think also kind of fits in with that sense of, like, Christian symbolism and, like, background that goes into a lot of the RWS imagery. But in a general sense, the Hanged Man is kind of a letting go, not doing anything, pausing action in order to move forward kind of sense, is how I usually look at it. So, the Hanged Man, the RWS, upside down. The Spacious Tarot does change it to the Hanged One, just to be a little bit more gender neutral, which is a nice touch, I think. Works for the deck. But the sense of kind of isolation, not quite isolation, but like separation from things, in the Hanged One and the Spacious Tarot, you kind of look at the image and you're so far distanced from the earth and basically everything that's happening there, right? There's and I forget the specifics, but like the astronaut effects, where people who have been up to space and seen the Earth from such a vast distance since they're not on it have kind of experienced like a very, like, life-changing moment, or like a perspective shift. And that's another aspect of the Hanged Man that I think is interesting, because in the RWS we have the perspective shift in the sense of, like, letting go, hanging upside down, seeing things from a different angle. But in the Spacious Tarot, there's a perspective shift in the sense of you're zooming way out, and you're looking at things at a vastly different scale rather than just like a slightly different angle. So I tend to read the Spacious Tarot, Hanged One, more as a, like, larger difference. A kind of, like, stepping way back, reevaluating the situation, taking a pause, and, like, seeing what's going on. Whereas sometimes the Hanged Man and the RWS, to me, is more of a, like, try a different angle, try a different solution. Maybe now is the time to pause, see what happens, and not, like, really go in and try to make a lot of changes when you're still stuck in the old way of thinking. So again, very similar concepts, but kind of just slightly different angles on the same thing that make it interesting to have multiple decks and kind of see what they all have to say. The next card that I grabbed is Temperance. And this is a card that I think I struggled with a little bit in the Spacious Tarot when I initially got it. Because again, it's this kind of scenic, less centered on like a person imagery, and it kind of takes a little bit of a different approach. I read Temperance very much as like balance, like peace, a time of like calmness, and there's, a lot of different angles and related keywords and sorts for that. But the Spacious Tarot has more of an emphasis on two different things combining and forming one, and we get some of that in the Cups and Temperance. And again, there's a lot of specific imagery on here, like the triangle. I know that means something specific, can't remember what it is. I don't usually incorporate that into my readings. But the Spacious Tarot doesn't have that. So I usually go off of the, like, two things combining to become one balance, give and take sort of thing. Which reads very clearly from the Spacious Tarot imagery, and the RWS is more of a, like we have a peaceful scene, somebody has, 1 foot in the water, 1 foot on land. There's still a sense of like combining and balance here, but I read the RWS more as balance and this a bit more as combining. So again, same base meaning, very similar, but just different kind of branching off of the same like mental thread. Another card that I grabbed to look at was the Devil, because, again, very different in the sense of, like, human figures versus none. And I really like the take that the Spacious Tarot kind of has on this. So, in the Devil, a lot of decks, I guess kind of basing themselves off of the RWS, will kind of mirror the imagery that we saw in the Lovers, where we have two figures, but now instead of, like, an angel and nice happy scenery behind, there's the Devil. And that puts a very specific kind of spin on the meaning of this card. I usually read the Devil as, like, you're being trapped by yourself, in that sort of a sense. Addiction, despair, that kind of stuff. I mean, we see the chains in the RWS art, and sure, maybe there's somebody controlling it, but that's the sort of kind of general sense that I use when I'm reading the RWS Devil. The Spacious Tarot takes a very different approach. Not too different, I suppose. It's still part of the same core set of like general meanings, I suppose. But in the Spacious Tarot imagery, there's no figures. There's nothing really. We get some branches in the dark. We see shadows. And it's still a shadowy card. It's still dark. In the Spacious Tarot Devil card, I usually look at this as like despair. We see a lot of darkness happening here, and it's this kind of like bleak nothingness that makes you want to give up. That sort of like inability, inaction sense, but it's more coming from, I guess, perhaps your environment or within yourself. And the RWS Devil kind of personifies it, at least in the art sense. So I think this one is really interesting to look at because, again, the Devil is one of those cards, kind of like the Death card, where, like, if you're introducing someone to tarot, it's like, okay, this one is kind of one of the scary ones, but, like, don't worry, that kind of thing. I think the Devil and the I'm forgetting the words already. The Devil and the Spacious Tarot, again, to me is a little bit less specific in the imagery, and it helps me kind of read it in a more broad sense. This was also one of the cards that I struggled with a little bit when I first got this deck because it was just so different to what I had been reading with before. But that's the Devil. And then the last major arcana card that I grabbed to talk about is Judgment. Because again, the Spacious Tarot creates a space for us that looks very different from kind of like the basic RWS imagery that we have. So Judgment is a card for me about transformation. There's a lot of, in the RWS, a sense about like being absolved of sins and transforming and descending and all of that stuff. Again, kind of integrated with the Christianity aspect that's present in a lot of these cards. We have like an angel in the sky calling down to people who are rising up, and it's Judgment Day and all of that stuff. So I do read Judgment as a kind of a personal transformation, leaving behind the old, going to something new. And at least for me, I feel like the card from the Spacious Tarot exemplifies that really well. A lot of these cards are great for just kind of looking at them and letting yourself fall into them and seeing the imagery as a space around you. Because, well, the cards are spacious. It's the Spacious Tarot. I really like how kind of in this card you're on the path and you go through this portal, and on the other side it's so different, but you can still see the path. And we have these trees with their branches around it, and it's a very stark, like wintry card until you go through that portal, that door. That makes a lot of sense to me when I'm reading this card as kind of transformation, like you're taking the next step, like there's a point of no return and now you're doing something new. There's this boundary between now and what you had before. That comes out to me really clearly in this art. And sure, the art in the RWS has that sort of aspect too. There's a transformation. Another common like keyword, I guess, is like you're hearing the call, and that makes sense for this. But this is also one of the reasons that I really do love the Spacious Tarot, because it's it's less specific. It doesn't have a lot of that like esoteric imagery that I haven't learned yet, and it lets me kind of fit more with like my perspective on the world. But yeah, that's the Judgment card. Again, really interesting differences here, and these are one of the cards too that like in different decks. It's just interesting to see what they have for this. The Seven of Cups is another one that I kind of struggled with initially when I was learning the Spacious Tarot, because this feels like a little bit more distressing, I guess, and in the middle of action than the Seven of Cups in the RWS. The Seven of Cups I usually read as like you're overwhelmed by choices, there's a lot happening, there's a lot of illusion, and in the RWS we see this figure kind of surveying all of these different cups with different things. We have lots of jewels and a castle and a snake and like a dragon. There's a lot going on in here. There's very much a sense of overwhelm and like having to choose. And in the Spacious Tarot, we have all those cups, but instead of being filled with lots of different things, well, they're falling, and the water's falling out. So I read both of these as overwhelm, but the Seven of Cups in the RWS feels more like a pause, like a fork in the road, where there's a lot of choices in front of you, and perhaps you're not quite sure which one to choose. Maybe some of them are tricking you, that sort of thing. And I read the Seven of Cups in the Spacious Tarot as more of a, like, you're trying to choose and make decisions while, like, everything is on fire around you, perhaps, or, like, things are falling, and there's a bit more of a sense of urgency here than there is in the RWS. So again, same base meaning, but just, like, a slightly different spin. And it's more interesting, right, when you have more cards in a reading to kind of play off of each other. And maybe that just one small aspect, like the way you'd read these two differently, kind of, like, flows throughout the reading and changes things. I don't know. That's the Seven of Cups. The next card I grabbed was the Ten of Cups. I'm not sure where it came from, but I've heard the term emotional ideal used a lot in regards to the Ten of Cups, which makes sense, right? In the RWS, we have some people that are happy. There's a rainbow. There's little kids dancing. We have some nice, beautiful scenery in the background. It's very nice, right? It's the culmination of the cups. Everything's coming together, and it's just generally a good emotional outcome. In the Spacious Tarot, we don't have the people or the imagery of like people dancing and doing things to kind of get that same effect. So instead we have 10 cups with different colors, and they're all pouring into the same thing and combining. When I read this card in the Spacious Tarot, I usually use, like, I get the term, like, everything coming together. There's still that sense of an emotional ideal, but maybe it's perhaps less centered on, like, family specifically. The Ten of Cups doesn't have to be about family, but in the RWS at least, it does kind of look like that. So the Ten of Cups can be a little bit more broad, and it's easier to kind of get that broadness from this card. Okay, now on to the swords. I grabbed the Seven of Swords to talk about, because this is one that's, when it comes up in a reading, it can be interesting. So the Seven of Swords, there's lots of meanings out there about the Seven of Swords being about, like, dishonor, hiding things, trickery, lies, secrets, all of that stuff. And in the RWS, we have this figure looking over their shoulder, carrying all kinds of swords. There's a bunch of tents in the background. Maybe there's a festival or some sort of civilization happening over there. But this person is just on their own, running away, carrying a bunch of swords. The Seven of Swords in the Spacious Tarot takes some of those aspects. We have 7 swords, one's on its own, and instead of having, like, a straight line in this sheet of ice, this one lone sword has kind of a cracked line in the ice that it's attached to. So, more abstract imagery here, since we don't have people in this deck. I've read some interesting things about people kind of, like, not quite reinterpreting, but looking at the Seven of Swords in a different way that's not always immediately like somebody's lying or like you're hiding something kind of sense. Because that's not always applicable. That's sometimes pretty specific. And if you're doing readings asking sorts of different questions, that doesn't always make as much sense. I kind of read the Seven of Swords as like something is hiding. But usually in the sense of like you're hiding from yourself. Or maybe in the aspect of like society is not letting you be your true self. So I think it's interesting in this Seven of Swords in the Spacious Tarot that perhaps at the surface everything looks the same. We have a variety of different swords up here, but kind of underneath or like as the shadow, there's differences. This one's not faring as well. There's something else going on here. A lot of that sounded pretty vague, I'm sure. But the Seven of Swords is an interesting one, and it's one that I want to spend a little bit more time going into because there's just been, like, people have had different interpretations of it, and I just think that's interesting. But that's the Seven of Swords. Okay, on to the Pentacles now. I grabbed the Three of Pentacles. I usually read the Three of Pentacles as a task-oriented team, which I also think is a keyword from Joan Bunning. But in the RWS, we have some people, they're working together, they have a project, there's feedback and teamwork, and they're getting something done, rather than, say, for like the example, the Three of Cups, where 3 people all together, but they're celebrating, and they're more in the emotional realm than the Pentacles get stuff done kind of realm. In the Spacious Tarot, we have 3 trees, and we're seeing underground with their root system and pentacles growing down there. Again, we don't have human figures, so the Spacious Tarot takes a little bit of a different approach. And here I get more of a sense of, like, nobody's alone, communication is happening, everyone's kind of working on their own thing, but they're all interconnected and intertwined. Even if you do think you're working alone, there's still that influence from the outside world. So this card feels like less project-based and less task-based to me. It's a more general, like, working on things, getting stuff done, progressing in life, while the RWS is very, like, we have a group of people and they're doing something and they're going to be good at it. Well, this one is a little bit less, like, personified. But that's the Three of Pentacles. And then the last card that I grabbed was really the one that made me start thinking about this originally. The Six of Pentacles. So in the RWS, we have a figure who is very clearly much richer than the other two figures on the card, distributing coins and holding a scale. So there is very clearly like a power imbalance in this card. There's a lot of emphasis on the has versus the have-nots. And the Six of Pentacles, when I read it, is about give and take, about this power imbalance. But in the Spacious Tarot, again, we get some scaled back imagery. We have 6 pentacles floating, the coins floating in the air, and 2 little nests or baskets beneath. And when I see this card, I get the sense of the pentacles are going to be put in these baskets, and somebody or something is controlling what goes where, how much goes where. There's still that aspect of power and balance, but I read this card specifically more as resource allocation. So in the sense that you only have limited time or resources to do what you want to do. And perhaps somebody else is controlling how much time, or how many resources you have. So we still get the sense of like somebody else is controlling things. But in this art, I read less kind of judgment and very clear power imbalance to more of a, like, you have to make some hard decisions on doing what you want with what you have available to you. So I think, a lot of the majors had very clear differences in terms of like, the people in the RWS represent a very specific scenario, while the more kind of landscape-oriented art of the Spacious Tarot shows you something a little bit more broad. But this card initially is one that I would read in the Spacious Tarot and go, I'm getting more of a sense of, like, choice, I guess, here, more than in the Six of Pentacles here, which is, like, about outside control, charity even, which is another kind of meaning of this card. But really, there's this person in this card is in control and the other people are not. So I just thought it was interesting how, especially in this case, sometimes the art for a deck can give you very different interpretations, even if they're kind of going off of the same source material or the kind of same general meanings. But yeah, I thought that, oh goodness, just kind of lay some cards out here. This was pretty fun. I like just kind of sitting down, going through the art, and kind of considering how I interpret different things. It was just kind of interesting to see how, like, side by side, what the art in the RWS does versus a different deck, and to kind of see, like, well, how does this affect my interpretation? What are all of the different meanings out there, and maybe what are some scenarios where I would read with one deck over another, depending on what I'm asking, what I'm looking for, that sort of thing. So I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had as good of a time as I did. I'd be interested to see if you kind of read like this, or if there's a deck that you have that reads like very specifically or is really different, or maybe is really the same. Maybe you looked at these cards in the Spacious Tarot and thought, no, yep, I read that exactly how I read the RWS, or maybe you had a different interpretation than I did. I'd love to know in the comments. Let's chat, because tarot symbolism is pretty cool, and there's, especially in the RWS, there's just so much going on in here, like esoteric, very specific symbolism that was put there very intentionally that I really haven't learned yet. So that's all I have for today. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon, evening, morning, whatever it is, wherever you are. And I will see you later. Bye!